And joining me now is Nash Borges, Vice President of Engineering and Data Science with Secureworks. Nash, thanks for joining us on Dark Reading News Desk today.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Tell us a bit about your role at Secureworks.
So I lead the engineering and data science groups that have built XDR from the ground up, and we're also responsible for Taegis VDR. To give you a little bit of backstory about myself, I started my career back in high school. I was recruited by the National Security Agency as one of the first kind of 802.11 wireless penetration testers. I got interested in doing more research and pursuing some graduate degrees, so I moved into human language technology research and did speaker recognition and speech recognition and those kinds of things. Ended up doing my dissertation in robust anomaly detection for acoustics and graphs, and started getting interested in what we called metadata, so combining geospatial, social network, behavioral, and content analytics. And I've always really enjoyed working with really smart analysts and combining the best of machine intelligence and human intuition, leveraging machine learning and big data analytics to find really important needles in immense haystacks. So I got interested in cybersecurity, joined Secureworks, who is building a new platform from the ground up. We've had a couple names over the years. Now we call it Taegis XDR. I think I was number 5 or 6 on the team, originally as a data scientist, and you know, it's been great ever since. So we've been building that from scratch, building out our team, and really, you know, focusing on the product.
Well, it's a shame that Secureworks couldn't find somebody more accomplished, so oh well. But bravo. Our focus is on how security leaders can start to distinguish the hype from the reality where AI in security operations is concerned. A very timely topic given the prominence that AI and its subset machine learning are playing, certainly with marketing.
Right.
Talk about what it means to bring AI to SecOps on both a practical but also on an organizational level.
Yeah, so we spend a lot of time focusing on threat detection, of course, and we'll talk perhaps about our new detector that we call our hands-on keyboard detector. But that's not the only use case that's important to security operations personnel. You can think about all the different data sources that XDR platforms have to integrate that can come from a variety of sources, and you need to parse that unstructured log data and extract entities like IP addresses and emails and usernames and that kind of thing, so you can kind of look for it in threat intelligence. You can also think about collecting a bunch of alerts from a bunch of different third-party devices, and some of those devices are noisier than others, and so you need to prioritize those and focus on the ones that matter, that your SOC analysts care about. And then at the end of the day, you need to take some response actions. So you might think about using machine learning to automatically kind of help especially your new junior SOC analysts, learn from your more senior SOC analysts, and learn, you know, what response actions they have taken in the past to, you know, kind of recommend them to take in the future. So there's a number of different use cases that AI can be helpful for. I think, you know, in some ways AI has hurt itself in this industry, focusing on anomaly detection and building a bunch of things that create a bunch of noise. And one of the things I really focus on very deeply in Secureworks is making sure that all of our detectors have very high levels of precision. They're not going to bury you in noise. And, you know, that comes from our experience operating our own SOC over 20 years and making sure that they're as efficient as possible.
As a side note, it's curious to me that someone like Brene Brown, the social scientist and vulnerability lecturer, was somehow able to insert AI and machine learning into a recent text of hers. It's sort of like somebody is chasing the algorithms here, the SEO. Like it's officially a thing.
As far as like how important these are in our.
Well, in terms of getting noticed and rising in search results, I mean, so people are clearly gaming this.
Right.
But back to our topic, it's also applicable and it seems to have its greatest prominence where automation is needed. The volumes of information that flood across the screens and the desks of SOC professionals. talk a bit about that, and to the degree that that helps with threat intelligence and just other functions that occur within the SOC.
Right, so one thing we often say is that AI is not a panacea. It's not going to solve all your problems. I often think about it in kind of the Pareto distribution of like an 80-20 type situation. So 80% of your security problems can be solved with having really good monitoring, collecting a bunch of information and telemetry from your endpoints, from your network devices, combining that with your cloud security logs and your identity systems and email providers that we were just hearing about. Really bringing that all into one system, normalizing it so your system can understand it and enrich that with industry-leading threat intelligence that we bring inside of our platform. You also want to make sure that you have a carefully curated and constantly updated set of signatures that are just going to find all the known threat activity that's out in the wild that everybody's seen before, and make sure that you're dealing with all the threats that people know about, and you're not going to kind of get bogged down in stuff that you've seen yesterday. And then machine learning and AI and these kinds of things are important when you're trying to detect the things that you haven't seen before. So you can think about 0 days and those kinds of applications where maybe you haven't seen it before, but some of the post-compromise activity is suspicious, okay. and you can start to focus in on more advanced techniques to find some of those kind of needles in the haystack that you haven't seen before.
So assuming that you drink your own champagne, can you give us an example or two about how you and your team put AI and machine learning to work on a practical level?
Yeah, sure. So our hands-on keyboard detector, if you think back a couple years ago now at the end of 2020, with all the SolarWinds activity, most of that was focused on a threat actor that we call Iron Ritual. Microsoft calls them Nobelium. And that was involving a really complex supply chain exploit where they got inside of that code and were changing things. But around the same time period, if you kind of dug under the headlines, there was another threat actor thought to be Chinese in origin that we refer to as Bronze Spiral. And they were exploiting the same piece of software, but using a very different initial access vector. In that case, they were using a 0-day authentication bypass vulnerability. And again, it was a 0-day, so you hadn't seen that before, including us, that particular way of getting onto the system. But when you're looking at that as a data scientist or a SecOps analyst, you can immediately kind of get a sense that there's something suspicious happening. You're seeing a bunch of kind of reconnaissance commands. They're living off the land. They're using system administration tools, ipconfig, who am I, listing the contents of directory. But they're outputting them to a file called license.txt. And you know what license files are for, and it's not for this purpose. So the question that we had is, can we learn from all of that information, the fact that they're interacting with these commands interactively using what amounts to a web shell, they're outputting these commands to files, they're running them in a certain sequence, they're processing them at the speed of the human mind because they have to understand the information that's coming back to them. So there's a certain manual process that you're observing. Can we learn how to characterize what amounts to that malicious behavior and differentiate it from all the benign system administration activity that we see in all of our customers' environments every day and we don't care about? And that's where machine learning really starts to shine, when you're focusing on these problems that the human mind can kind of immediately see something and perceive something that is suspicious in this case, is a really good application of machine learning. And so what we're able to do is characterize all this data and differentiate it from all the benign activity. And so at the end of the day, we took 2 years of data in our data lake, about 25 petabytes, trillions of events, distilled it down into billions of feature vectors, and created 287 detections. And about 280 of those were true positives. Some of them were about the same threat actor, just at different times of their kill chain. 5 of them were red teams, and then 2 were false positives. So we're over 99% precision processing this immense amount of data. And it's that type of signal to noise ratio that's really powerful to use machine learning. And you want to make sure that you're operating at that level of precision whenever you're going to use AI.
Sure. Nash, I want to thank you for stripping away a lot of the hype and really getting to the practical applications of both AI and ML. Thanks for joining us on the Dark Reading News Desk today.
Thank you.
We've been talking with Nash Borges from Secureworks. This has been Terry Sweeney for the Dark Reading News Desk.